In 1326, Queen Isabella, the estranged wife of Edward II, made her move to overthrow her husband and replace him as king with hers and Edward's son, the would-be Edward III. What's more, she would also have revenge on the man who had, in Isabella's own words, come between her and her husband, Hugh Despenser the Younger. Before setting out on this most dramatic of campaigns, Isabella, having been in a sort of self imposed exile on the continent, arranged the formal betrothal of the younger Edward to Philippa, a daughter of the Count of Hainault. Isabella also obtained military support from the Count as she gathered an army from across Hainault, France, and Germany. Accompanied by her ally and possible lover Roger Mortimer, the Earl of Wigmore, who was also disenchanted with the king, Isabella's army landed in England in late September 1326. On their landing in England, Isabella and Mortimer were greeted by a whole host of nobles, including the Earl of Lancaster, whose father had been one of the fiercest enemies of Edward II, but who had been defeated in battle in 1322 and executed not long after. Edward had also made enemies out of a number of powerful religious figures, including the Bishop of Hereford, Adam Alderton, who would become one of Isabella's key supporters in the plot. Alderton, a renowned speaker, told the nobles who had assembled in support of Isabella that the king must be brought to submission. Meanwhile, Queen Isabella continued to bristle with indignation against Hugh Despenser the Younger, as well as his father. Isabella wanted the Despensers in her grasp immediately, so she could ensure their final and total destruction. But cooler heads realised that this was easier said than done. Earlier in the reign, Edward had fought tooth and nail for his favourite Piers Gaveston. Piers had been executed ultimately, but Edward, it was clear, would be hell-bent on ensuring history wouldn't repeat itself, although he surely must have known, by taking this stance, he was jeopardising his crown. Anxiety gripped England. An invading force, largely foreign, had entered the country. One chronicler said that the army was so large that there was scarcely enough food to feed them. This is an exaggeration, but all the same, the fear of another destructive civil war in England once again loomed large. Edward, on hearing of his wife's arrival, retreated into Wales, first to Chepstow, before moving on to the castle at Neath. Alongside him was the younger Hugh Despenser, his Chancellor Robert Baldock, and a small retinue. The news of Edward's retreat clearly emboldened Isabella and her supporters. At Oxford, in front of the Queen, Mortimer, and the innocent young Prince Edward, the Bishop of Hereford gave another fiery speech, calling for the deposition of Edward II. Isabella's army, strengthened by new arrivals from the north, then marched on Gloucester. In London, Walter Stapledon, Bishop of Exeter and former treasurer, was murdered and his head sent to his enemy Isabella at Gloucester. Enemies of Edward II, imprisoned in the Tower of London, as Roger Mortimer had been until his daring escape, were set free. Isabella then moved on from Gloucester to Bristol, where she besieged Hugh Despenser the Elder. Those defending Bristol surrendered to the Queen and threw themselves on her mercy, but Hugh the Elder was executed in brutal fashion. Isabella then stayed at Hereford and ordered Henry of Lancaster to go and pursue her hapless husband and bring him into custody. Lancaster discovered the king was hiding at Neath and captured both him and Hugh the Younger. For both Hugh and Edward, the end was nigh. For the king, deposition was inevitable, but, for a time anyway, he could hope that his life may be spared. Hugh, having so enraged the Queen, could harbour no such hopes. After a sham trial, Hugh was hanged, drawn, and quartered at Hereford, with Isabella watching on. Isabella herself may have harboured some justifiable resentments against Hugh and Edward, but as acting regent for the young Edward III, her own and Roger Mortimer's behaviour would be no less greedy, no less arrogant, and no less self serving than the Despensers and Piers Gaveston had been.